Hello, and welcome to Ending Physician Overwhelm. I'm your host, Dr. Megan Mello. I'm a family and obesity medicine physician, as well as a certified life coach for physicians. In this podcast, we talk about how the learned habits of people-pleasing, perfectionism, and a lack of boundaries show up in our lives and how they contribute to burnout, exhaustion, and overwhelm. The healthcare system is broken, my friends, but let's not wait for it to be fixed in order to feel better. Hello, my friend, and thank you for tuning in today. Today, we're going to be talking about something that I've been hearing over and over again from physicians that I think is a major roadblock to us feeling like we are doing a good job. And by doing a good job, certainly I mean the physician work that we do, but I also just mean our place as humans in the world. The career of medicine, the career of being a physician is often something that people are carrying around as primary part of their identity. But we're going to take a deeper dive into this question here of what happens when we feel like we are not doing a good job. And the question I specifically want to pose to you is, are you a good physician? This question has been coming up over and over again. I should say that it's not even being asked as a question in these places where it's been coming up. It's actually been put forward to me as a statement. And it's been coming in two different flavors, and we'll talk about both of these today. The first flavor is someone who is very firm that they are not a good physician and they never can be. And most typically, this, comes from a place of something happened. There was some event that probably involved patient harm, perhaps even a patient death, that this individual is attaching 100% responsibility for, and it is the reason why they are not a good physician. That's story number one. Story number two is a little different, and it's been more common in my experience. But story number two is, I can't be a good physician until, and then, fill in the blanks, right? Until I am happy, answering every single question that the patient sends me, or says out loud to me, all of the time. I cannot be a good physician until I can recite up to date forwards and backwards, and I don't even have to look at anything. I cannot be a good physician until I never have a bad day, or, I never make a mistake or say anything wrong, or I never get a patient complaint. There's a lot of story out there from many of us that falls into this second category, right? The sort of withholding of this feeling like we're doing a good job until we've met some sort of milestone. And often, because our identity is so attached to being a physician, this is also holding us back in all the other arenas in our lives, right? Whether we're a parent, a partner, a spouse, a sibling, a son or a daughter, right? We are often waiting to achieve a good enough status as a physician that might allow us to feel good enough in the rest of the areas of our lives. And so whether you are carrying story number one or story number two, if we're walking around feeling like we aren't good at this physician job, right? It has this layer of heaviness to it that I'm not sure that other professions feel. And correct me if I'm wrong, because I haven't worked as an elementary school teacher or, I've worked as many things, right? I'm not a lawyer. I'm not an accountant. I'm not a software tech person. There are lots of jobs that I haven't had. And I guess I don't know how intrinsic those folks' identity is, tied in with their profession. But I do know that in the physician community, often it has been this thing that is so elevated in our minds and in the minds of other people. People cannot see us as anything other than a physician. They might see us as a physician but a lot of the times they are not seeing us as a human first, and we are not seeing ourselves as a human first. And so it's really important that we understand more about the story and more about the impact that this story has on us and how we feel. Because so much of the struggle of burnout and overwhelm and drowning in anxiety has to do with the stories that we are carrying around. And often we don't even know why they're there, where they come from, but they feel true. And when that feels true, and the truth in quotation marks that we're carrying around is that we're not good. And not just like we're not good at our job, right? But we are not good because we are not good at our job. That has a damaging heaviness to it. And certainly I don't have to mention that physician suicide is a very real phenomenon. And that's not what we're going to focus on today, but I think it's so important that we recognize the insidious nature of not feeling like we are good and how that can lead to these devastating outcomes as well. So let's talk about it. I'd love for you to answer the question, are you a good physician? Are you a good physician? And see what immediately pops to mind, right? Are you carrying one of these stories around? Because when we are, we need to really dive in and understand. And when I think back to times in my life, I believed I was a good physician. I believed that I did good work because I was, really popular with patients and, for the most part, staff really enjoyed working with me. So I could see that I must have been doing at least some of the things right. But of course, I could also pay so much attention to where I was falling short, right? I, would run late. I don't consider myself the most advanced diagnostician. I'm a family practice physician. I'm not going to figure out all the weird zebras that are out there, right? I'm not going to know all the weird patterns and I'm not going to know how everything changes, right? And I carried that as part of my identity of like, yeah, no, I'm bottom of the totem pole. What else was in there though was this feeling that I couldn't possibly be a good physician and feel as bad as I did and feel as unhappy, as overwhelmed, as burned out, as frustrated, as resentful as I did. Because how on earth could a good physician feel all those things? Shouldn't a good physician just be happy to take care of patients? Shouldn't a good physician just be able to roll with it, right? To suck it up, to just, pretend like they don't have feelings, right? I had both stories going on. And I think that's true for many of us, that we are walking around with, perhaps knowing that patients really want to come in to see us and they respect us, but also feeling like there are things holding us back from being a good physician that are never going to be attainable. So I want you to tune in and ask yourself, am I a good physician? Do I think I'm a good physician? And notice what comes, right? Notice what comes up for you in that story is where we're going to start. What is the story? So if you are answering the question of like, no, I'm not a good physician because blah, 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 right? That is the story, right? Everything that you fill in the blanks with, everything that follows, I'm not a good physician because is the story that you currently have about why you are not a good physician. If you are more in the camp of, well, I'm a good physician in this way, but, and then, whatever follows the but is your story, right? You'll never be a good physician until that but is resolved. So first we have to understand, what is the story? What is the story that we're making up about, what a good physician is and how we are not that same? So that's step one. Step two, I want you to ask yourself, where is this story coming from? And that can get very interesting because sometimes we are feeling like we're such a hot mess inside and everybody else seems to be so calm and they just know things and they just seem to have this ease about their medical work. then we can't possibly be a good physician because here we are feeling like a hot mess, right? It doesn't really matter what other people think because they don't know what's going on inside my head, right? We might have stories like that, and they're coming from this place of comparing our insides, right? Comparing how we feel to how others look on the outside. Cool, calm, and collected, which we definitely don't feel. We may also have adopted someone else's story. Maybe you had an attending physician who really drilled into you as a learner that a good physician is this. And you've held on to that story for such a long time, even though it's not obtainable. Depending on when you trained, depending on who taught you, there may be a lot of stories out there that have originated from a time that no longer exists. There was a time when medicine was primarily driven by men who had a stay-at-home spouse. They may or may not have had children, but they may or may not have had much of a role in raising them. They may or may not have been very involved in anything going on in the home. And, if we think back to the origins of the CME conference, that was designed to have doctors take a break, right? Take some kind of vacation, right? They said, well, maybe if we have a conference that is medical and we have it for part of the day, but we put it in this one's place, maybe they'll step out and, take somewhat of a vacation, right? That's some of the origins of the CMA conference in Hawaii or Disney World or, wherever. If you have the construct that archetype is, the ideal physician, someone who takes call all day, all the time, right? Someone who is sort of never not on, who never says no, who, has 100% full support at home in an era that no longer exists. I can understand how you're never going to feel that you are doing a good enough job, but those times are over. But what I want you to notice here really is, where are these stories coming from? You may also be getting a story from someone who doesn't do physician work, right? You might be getting it from a patient. What does the patient think a good physician is? A good physician will give me the prescriptions that I want, and they're not going to charge for their time. They are going to underbill. They are going to take all the time that I need, right? Maybe we're internalizing that. Maybe we're internalizing that a good physician has 100% performance on Press-Keaney and HEDIS measures, right? Maybe we're absorbing it from our clinic management. Maybe we're absorbing it from other staff who look at Dr. So-and-so over here who never says no and, is always so pleasant. But here we are, we have human emotions sometimes. We set some boundaries. We say no. We make them wait. Maybe we're carrying that story around, right? But let's look and see, where is that story? What is the story and where is that story coming from? The next step is a reflection on, who am I when I believe this story? And this comes out of Byron Katie's The Work, if any of you are familiar with it. But who am I when I believe that this is true, right? Who am I and how am I when I believe that I'm not a good physician because ... How do I show up? How do I feel? What am I projecting? What am I internalizing? So many of us are walking around with the story of not being good enough, and we're sitting in rooms with patients who are expressing all of their copious dismays with the very broken healthcare system in which we are participating, right? They've had long wait times. They've had a delayed diagnosis. They don't like that their prescriptions cost that much money. They don't like the way that a specialist treats them. There's a litany of complaints, and some are very legitimate, right? And some are more first world in nature. But regardless, if we have the story that we aren't good enough because blah, 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 and we're sitting in this environment where we're getting more feedback about how we are part of the system that is failing our patients, Or, we're in some meeting about how we're not meeting some productivity metric, even though we feel like we're drowning. How damaging is it to feel this complete lack of confidence in ourselves? It's huge. It's heavy. It's tremendous. This isn't helping us. Who am I when I believe the story that I'm not doing a good job, that I'm not capable of doing a good job, or that I will only be doing a good job when I no longer have human emotions, when I no longer make mistakes, when I do everything just so, right? That's the dark side of perfectionism, right? And we will never get there because we are humans and we are fallible. The final part of this practice, this exercise, is checking in to see what would happen if I let go of this story about not being good enough. For most people, there's a deep fear sitting there. There is a fear that they will become lazy. There is a fear that they won't try anymore, that they won't keep learning, that they won't keep caring, right? That if I felt like I was a good physician, then maybe I would just relax back in my chair and sip coffee all day and not do any work. What's the chance of that? What is the chance of that? Now, I know my people. I know my high-achieving, hardworking people who skew towards perfectionism and people-pleasing and lack of boundaries. That isn't going to happen. We are not those people. I'm not saying those people don't exist. And we aren't talking about any judgments about them. We are just talking about us. If I believe that I'm a good physician, when I practice that, when I am leaning into that energy, I show up and I do good work. I still set boundaries because I see that that's necessary. I choose to say no, knowing that I'm going to disappoint some people, but I no longer hold my self-worth tied up to other people's notions. I know that I'm doing a good job, and I know that I am not going to be the right flavor for every person. And I know that I'm not going to be the only person participating in this person's healthcare, right? There are a lot of things that I am baking into this, but this person's health outcomes are not fully fixed on me. And when I show up and do my best, and I do the things that I know how to do, when I learn and grow from a place of curiosity and healthy striving and not perfectionism, that is me showing up as a good physician. I still make mistakes. Of course I do. And so will you. But how would you show up? How would life feel if you trusted that you were a good physician, right? If you know you're going to make mistakes, but you are going to have your own back, you are going to take care of your patient, right? You are going to get the help that they need. You are going to figure it out. You're going to be there with. You are going to understand that not all disease is curable. You are going to understand that not everybody will take your advice, that not everybody will follow your directions, that not everyone will respond as you expect them to do. But you will no longer tie those things to whether or not you're a good physician. If you work in a large healthcare system, especially one that employs, HEDIS metrics and all of these things, you may be receiving the constant message that you are not a good physician because you don't have patients who are 100% on their mark, right? When I was an employed physician previously, I worked in a part of the county where we had a disproportionate amount of diabetes. We had, disproportionate amounts of obesity, and we had a lot of people who were poorly controlled in their disease states. Now, did we work hard to try and reverse that? Yes. Did it always work? No. Did patients always, quote unquote, comply? No. Sometimes they were choosing not to do so because they were so overwhelmed taking care of their grandkids and blah, 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 right? All of their very real socioeconomic stressors. Sometimes they didn't think their chronic disease was important. Sometimes they probably didn't understand what was going on, no matter how many times we had talked about it, right? There were a lot of barriers. Sometimes they just didn't want to stop what they were doing. there were a lot of barriers, as there is everywhere in healthcare, about why they may not be quote unquote in control, right? Why they are quote unquote not compliant. But that doesn't have anything to do with my skill as a physician. That doesn't mean that they didn't have access to, resources and, yes, imperfect, right? Because we know that the American healthcare system is foundationally struggling with racism. It has for a long time with, poor access for low socioeconomic status folks, right? Struggles with, language barrier. Like there's all sorts of problems, but we cannot tie all of those outcomes to whether or not we are a good physician because most of it is outside of our control. It is something like 20% of the healthcare that a person receives influences their health status. That's the Pareto principle of work, right? Most of what influences their health is stuff that is outside of us. But again, if I'm carrying the story that I can't be a good physician until everybody's in control, until, all these measures are perfect, until my patients understand 110% what is going on with them and what they need to do when they walk out the door, until everybody likes me, until I never have a bad day, until I never make a mistake, until I'm never grumpy or upset or annoyed that somebody is 15 minutes late for their 20-minute appointments. If I'm holding out that I can't be a good physician until I will never get there. If I'm walking around with the story that I am not a good physician, I will never be able to lean into my potential. I will never be able to show up fully in that space. I will always be hustling for my worth and I will never get it. That is a very real contributor to burnout because we are creating an unwinnable game. And I think it's very important to acknowledge that this is an essential part of burnout, and it is not one that someone else can fix for us. We can do it in partnership with people, right? If you work with a therapist, a coach, someone who's supporting you, you can do the work together, but no one can actually change your thoughts for you. No one can get into your head and undo that. And if you cannot undo that story, it is very difficult to come out of burnout, right? Because we will always feel like a failure. It's important to acknowledge that that is not the only component of burnout, but it is one that is often missed because we want to solve burnout with vacation or FMLA leave or switching jobs or taking, decreasing our FTE. We want to solve burnout with these things, and it makes total sense that we do. But until we undo that story about how we're not a good physician, we're not going to fix this. What happens if you show up comfortable and confident in the notion that you are a good physician or that you just might be one? How does that change things for you? Again, we might have this very real fear that will make us lazy, that will make us sloppy, that will lead to all kinds of pains and problems. And I just want to tell you, it's not true. It also doesn't make you an asshole. Being willing to settle into this place where you think, I do good work. I take care of patients. I am not fully able to cure all disease. I am not fully able to undo the woes of the healthcare system. I am not fully able to manhandle all diseases into submission, right? I am not able to convince all my patients that they need to do X, Y, and Z thing to get better, right? But I will no longer tie my self-worth as a physician or as a human to those outcomes. That's me taking a deep breath. This work is real. And if you're walking around with this story that you are not a good physician, just feel healing energy, love, kindness, whatever you want coming towards you, because this is a very real notion for so many of us walking around with it. And I hear you. I feel you. I get it. We've got to let this story go. Are there some not good physicians out there? Of course there are, right? We all have heard terrible stories of this thing, and you want to read the scariest book in the world. I don't remember the name of it, but I will put it in the show notes about a terrible story. Sorry, a true story of a serial killer who, was a medical student and then a resident and then an attending, and just routinely murdered people, right? That is not a good position, right? That is a silly and egregious example, right? We know that there are people out there who are operating with poor judgment and all sorts of problems, right? That's not who I'm talking to. Who I am talking to is you. And if any one of you are carrying around this story, again, I see you, I hear you, I get it, and we've got to put this down. Even if something happened to one of your patients, even if you don't have all the gray zones on your HEDIS measures, your press community, right? Even if people have complained, even if people don't like you, right? Even if you run behind, even if you say no, if we're walking around with this story, we've got to let it go. I hope you will join me in leaning into this idea that you are a good physician, or that you just might be a good physician, right? That we can let go of whatever story you're carrying around about why you can't be or you're not going to be until. We've got to let that go. Join me in practicing this. And if you need help, reach out. I'd be happy to support you. My friends, that's what I have for you today. Thank you as always for your time and attention. It means so much to me. If you have just a moment, I invite you to please leave a rating and a review for this podcast in iTunes or your podcast player. That really helps the algorithm to help get this into, the ears of other people who need to hear it. If you don't want to do that, but you are willing to share it, then please share it. Because again, that also helps it to get into the ears of people who need to hear it. More people need to receive these messages. And I'm so grateful for you taking the time to share, rate, and review. Have a wonderful week, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye. Well, that's our show for today. Thank you as always for listening. To learn more about my coaching programs, head to www.healthierforgood.com. And if you love this podcast, please drop us a review on iTunes or support the show by clicking the link in the show notes. Until next time, take care.